Pee-wee's Playhouse was a mind-bending kids show that turned children's television on its head. Paul Reubens, its creator, has died. He was a cult hero, and his work shaped generations of comedians. Today, we celebrate Paul Reubens. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. As a kid, there was no better way to start a Saturday morning than with this. This morning on Commotion, we're remembering the actor who played Pee-wee Herman and created that wild and whimsical world that so many kids like myself and adults got to see in the 80s and 90s. It blew my young mind and made me realize that the world was so much bigger and weirder than I ever could have imagined. Paul Reubens has died of cancer. He was 70. In a statement posted to social media, he's described as someone who delighted generations with his positivity, whimsy, and belief in the importance of kindness. To remember Paul Reubens, we're joined by another Paul Myers, a journalist who writes about music and comedy, and also happens to be Mike Myers' brother. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's not a great reason to talk to me, but I'm happy to be here for both Paul Reubens and for the CBC.
Paul, tell me about what went through your mind when you heard this news yesterday.
Well, like many people, I was shocked because it's kind of a weird thing because Pee-wee Herman, the character, is one thing, and he seemed timeless. Therefore, he didn't seem to have an age, which means subconsciously he will never die. Pee-wee Herman can never die. The character will never die. But Paul Reubens, as it turns out, is mortal. And he had also not told a lot of his closest friends, many of whom I sort of know. Yeah, I know some of them pretty well. And an acquaintance of mine is Lorraine Newman from Saturday Night Live, and she's known him since before he was doing anything. She knew him in 1973, and she didn't know. Wow. And she was shocked. And he was part of this theater group called The Groundlings in Los Angeles, which are many people would know in comedy. They were very influential. They're kind of like what Second City was on the East Coast. They're a training ground for a lot of comedians, including Kristen Wiig and people like and Phil Hartman. And they all came out of this place. So they go all the way back, and they didn't know. So it was just shocking, yeah. And tributes poured in from so many different corners and so many different types of people like Guillermo del Toro, Cher, Jimmy Kimmel, Amy Sedaris. In such a crowded field, what do you think made Paul Reubens so unique in the comedy world? Joy. It was joy. I kept coming back to that word in my own sort of eulogizing. This is somebody who lived for creative explosions, like things that, and I say that in the sense that there were bursts of color in his work, bursts of madness in his work. He spit out so much pop culture trivia in the back of his whatever he was doing. That's just in the Pee-wee Herman character. As a gifted performer, he could play a range of different people. And like I saw him in the movie Blow, and he was a completely different character. And we barely saw that side of him. He was just an amazing actor. So yeah, I think joy. And on a personal level, not my personal level, but when he interacted with the people he knew and loved, he was kind to extreme. Like I have friends who have had birthday greetings sent to them by him, little voice recordings or face recordings, FaceTimes, and he would just improvise birthday greetings to people, and he was always right on camera and looking right at the person he's sending the message to. And just that somebody who spends that much time being in the service of others is I don't know about sainthood, but he's definitely worth, any person who does that is worth remembering super fondly at this moment,
I love that word joy, and he brought so much joy to people. And he really seemed to inhabit that character. It never felt like Paul Reubens was playing Pee-wee. Take a listen to this clip of him on David Letterman back in 1983.
Welcome, please, Pee-wee Herman. Nice to see you.
Thanks. How's it going?
Going pretty well?
It still makes me laugh. How much of Pee-wee was in the real Paul Reubens?
Or how much is Paul Reubens in the real Pee-wee?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I guess, you hear it there, and when he hosted SNL eventually, Saturday Night Live, he hosted it in character for the whole evening. Like wasn't Paul Reubens and he did a Pee-wee Herman sketch. It was Pee-wee Herman hosted that show. I'd say they were, I think it reminds me of Charlie Chaplin when you sort of think back to the character of the little tramp that Charlie Chaplin became. The idea that it was what's the word? An enabling device for Paul Reubens. Pee-wee allowed Paul Reubens to just spit out all the pop culture stuff of his generation and contextualize it and be subversive with it. Like, he was subversive with it because he spread messages within that stuff. Pee-wee was a brat, but Pee-wee was not nasty. Mm-hmm. Pee-wee will always pretend to be nasty. There's moments in the 1981 Pee-wee Herman show, the stage show, is on in the States. It's on HBO Max. I don't know if it's available in Canada, but I just watched it last night again, and it is so. There's a point where they do a medley of Sly Stone songs on stage, and there's a lot of subtext to why they're doing it, but they're singing all these songs of empowerment that were, pop songs, but still they were very subversively, message songs, and it was in the middle of this like nerdy guy walking around. Like, he was a nerd, but he was never a loser. You know what I mean? Like, he was always in charge. I know those are just thoughts I'm having as I remember it, but.
No, it's brilliant. After Letterman, he starred in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, kind of my introduction to him. Take a listen to this.
What's going on, officer?
We're looking for an escaped convict, ma'am.
We heard all about it on the radio. Right, honey?
Would you mind stepping out of the car, ma'am?
No, not at all, officer. Some sort of problem?
No problem at all. I just wanted to take a quick look at that cute little outfit you have on.
Why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer.
That laughter just keeps going and going and going. What's your take on that film?
Well, I think it's a perfect comedy film. It's a perfect comedy script, but it's a saga of a man trying to get his bike back. Or I say man, but there's no age to Pee-wee Herman, so he could have been a boy. We don't know. And it, it's a perfect marriage of Tim Burton's wild imagination, but also Pee-wee Herman, Paul Reubens' wild imagination. The art direction, the sets are beautiful. The set pieces are beautiful. It is, I wrote a book about the Kids in the Hall, and I produced the documentary Comedy Punks. And I've also been just finishing right now writing a book on John Candy. So I've spent a lot of time studying comedy in the last little while. And I feel like it is a perfect film. And I will also tell you, you mentioned that my brother is Mike Myers, and it has to be said that I had a very unique moment in my life where I was in Los Angeles when Mike was working on a film, and he brought in Tim Burton to the house where Mike lived. Mm-hmm. And he brought Tim Burton over, and they watched Pee-wee Herman. They watched Pee-wee's Big Adventure together because Mike wanted to study it. He wanted to know what was going on. I mean, I think Paul Reubens was out of town at the time. So it was it would have been, I think he also was interested in Tim Burton's process. How do you make that movie? And it was hearing these two professionals, my brother and Tim Burton, talk about what a perfect movie it is was like a masterclass for me as, I'm a musician first, so I was just watching it as a musician would watch it. And I'm learning all this comedy stuff and the technique behind it. And you don't see that when you're watching in the movies. You just enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And that's how it should be. You shouldn't have to know how the chef made it, but but we often do want to know. It was confirming for me that this was one of the greatest comedy films of all time.
I have to rewatch it. And I have to say, for people who grew up in the 80s and 90s, Pee-wee's Playhouse was just one of the biggest things on Saturday morning. Here's a clip from that show. Just Just to give you a sense of what that show meant to me, I remember as a kid thinking, when I have kids, I'm going to make them watch this show so that they can really understand great cinema. You know what I mean? How did his sense of humor translate for kids? Because I think a lot of the people listening will have remembered Pee-wee's Playhouse as their intro.
Well, here's some context for you. When I was a kid, my dad watched me watching Bugs Bunny. And when I would watch Bugs Bunny, I don't know if kids today watch Bugs Bunny, but it seemed to me that Bugs Bunny transcended time and space. And my dad said, how do you get that joke? Because there was some kind of adult humor. And there was something going on that was just, it might not have been dirty, but it was definitely something that grown-ups would know. Mm-hmm. And we just laughed because it was silly. We didn't know that, that I love multi-level comedy because you can laugh at the silliness. Monty Python had this at their best moments. You can laugh at the silliness, but if you knew the reference, you had an extra laugh. And that's genius to me. When you can find a way to, have fun on several levels. So I think Pee-wee, when you're a kid, what's not to like? We're kids. We like dangling keys in front of our crib. It's all flashing lights. And Wayne White, who was an artist that had an association with Pee-wee, would make a lot of the set pieces for the show. And if you think about the world that came after that, Amy Sedaris is known for visual stuff. Todd Oldham, all these people that came out of that world. And if you look at Greta Gerwig's big film this year. And the world of Barbie is not unlike the world of Pee-wee's Playhouse. There's a lot of multicolored flashiness and stylized edges that make the story palatable or interesting. And there's all these it's a beautiful combination of fun and subversion.
Perfectly put, Paul. Paul, thank you so much for being here. Paul Myers is a journalist who writes about music and comedy. He joined us from Berkeley, California, to remember Paul Reubens, who we'll never forget as Pee-wee Herman. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. Okay, take a listen to this. This is Bryan Cranston on the picket line outside the Disney building in New York a few days ago.
We've got a message for Mr. Iger. We will not be having our jobs taken away and giving to robots. We will not have you take away our right to work and earn a decent living. And lastly, and most importantly, we will not allow you to take away our dignity.
If the strike by American actors and writers hasn't hit home for you yet, when you've run out of new stuff to watch in a few months, well, you might feel a little differently. And with the two sides getting nowhere, some people are sending a message straight to the streamers by canceling their subscriptions. Aurora Brown is one of those people who's voting with her viewing habits. She's a Canadian actor you might know from Baroness von Sketch. And Teri Hart is a regular here on Commotion. She's been keeping us up to date on the strike since they started. Here's our conversation. Aurora, I'm going to start with you because you did it. You canceled your Disney Plus subscription. Why?
Yes, we did it. My husband and I are both actors. We'd had Disney Plus for a while. We'd enjoyed some things. And I was pretty disgusted with Bob Iger's comments and the attitude towards people that it seemed to betray. And so maybe it was a spur of the moment thing, but we just decided, you know what, we haven't, we've watched a few things, but a lot of it's just sitting there. And we know that the only way that they listen to people is maybe if it hurts their wallet. So we thought, why not? Let's do it. It's a drop in a bucket, but buckets are made up of a lot of drops. So we thought we would try it. And it might just be a symbolic stance, but it was what we could do in that moment.
And remind us what those comments were that pushed you to do this.
Well, we had been following the writer's strike, and then with the actor strike, we watched Fran Drescher's very moving speech on the day of. And then when Bob Iger sitting in some luxurious looking environment saying, it's just not reasonable for these actors to and writers to ask for this. It's disturbing to him, I think is the word that he used about what it said for the industry. And I thought, well, you couldn't do this industry without them and what they do. So the fact that you think it's an inconvenience or somehow, or, an imposition on the serious business of, getting IP out to people, I just couldn't believe it. And it certainly hit on a nerve that has been getting more and more inflamed in both my husband and I over the last few years, of just realizing what a corporation who is, as Fran Drescher said, focused on Wall Street, when they start making all their decisions based on how can we improve our shareholders' return this quarter, that is, I guess, their fiduciary duty, but it's an unsustainable way to think. And it has tons of collateral damage for the actual people who are involved in the business.
Now, I have 2 small kids, and that is essentially why I have a Disney subscription. Yep. You're also a mom. Did you talk to your son about this?
We did. We said, hey, we're thinking of canceling Disney. He said, okay. Now, in our house, we are all gamers. So our entertainment goes out to a whole bunch of other, ways to get it. But we also read. We also do other things. And he's away at camp right now. So he couldn't do much about it, but he was fine with it. Okay, good. And perfect timing while he's at camp. Yes.
Terry, we heard Bryan Cranston single out Bob Iger, head of Disney, just as Aurora did. And I'm wondering how vulnerable you think Disney, or really any of these big studios, are to this kind of pressure from the public of other people canceling their subscriptions.
Yeah, so I really wish that the answer to this question is different, but they just don't seem to care, right? And they don't seem vulnerable. I think Aurora's choice is completely admirable, but as she mentioned and recognizes, it is that drop in a bucket, and the volume of people that would need to cancel their subscriptions to impact these companies. It's hard to imagine. It would have to be like a global movement. All of these streamers have a lot of content to get through before they run out. And when and if that happens, they're just going to look to international producers. So the streamers have a lot of power. And as Aurora said so rightly, these are all publicly traded companies. So they answer to their shareholders, not their employees.
Aurora, you didn't just cancel Disney Plus. You also got rid of Netflix in the spring. What about going to the movies? We've got Barbenheimer happening. We've got Mission Impossible. Are you feeling weird about that as well?
Well, when we spoke the other day, this came up, and I've been thinking about it ever since, because I haven't been to a theater in a while, and I had been planning. I was like, oh, can't wait to go see the Barbie movie once it's stopped selling, once it's not so sold out anymore. And now I'm really thinking about it, because isn't that picking and choosing when I want to? I'm like sitting in my home going, well, I'm just not going to pay for Disney anymore and line their pockets, but I happily run down to watch that movie. So I don't know yet. It's uncomfortable. I've just, I put an audition on tape last week for work here in Canada. We're not on strike, but part of me was like, should I even be participating in this? Like, shouldn't we all be supporting them? It's, I guess I'll have to wrestle with that. If I was to go, the only way I could justify it is that, I guess I could show them that, by my presence, that Marvel and all the very rehashed IPs aren't good anymore, and that we do want something new. But I don't think they would care about that. As we were just saying, they just care that I went and paid them some money. I don't think the question of dignity ever affects them, or you can't shame them into doing it. So I don't know yet. I'm really gonna have to think about it.
It's complicated. It sounds really complicated. Teri, I'm wondering, the unions themselves are not asking people to cancel subscriptions or even stage a boycott. But why is that when it is such a clear consumer action that they can direct people towards?
Well, it is complicated because both SAG-AFTRA and the WGA members, they want their shows watched. They actually need to prove and want to prove to the AMPTP that people want to see the content that the writers and actors are creating. The unions don't want the streaming services to fail. They want the streamers to pay them fairly and have their persons and skills protected from AI. Now, as shows come to the end of their runs and if streamers start to populate their platforms with more international content or older content, that could be when we hear from the unions to show our support by canceling. But for now, the unions haven't asked for that. In fact, they've actually said, go to the movies and watch your favorite shows because that is their commodity. That's what they have. That's what they are fighting to be paid correctly for.
Is there something people can do to support this strike from their homes or from the box office?
I mean, what we've been hearing is donate to the unions, donate to, like, if you want to cancel your subscription, take that money and donate to the unions, because if this goes on for a long time, people are going to be in financial distress. And so that's where they can help. People can help with actual financial donations.
Aurora, you mentioned, putting something on tape. You're an actor here in Canada. You're even questioning whether that's okay. But how much is riding on the outcome of this strike for you personally?
I mean, I'm not a SAG member, so I'm not directly involved that way. It's more of, I think it's more of a situation where there is a very real trickle-down effect that what happens with SAG will inevitably affect people up here in Canada with ACTRA. I mean, there's so many productions that come up to Canada to work. And while people have, they have different contracts, I'm sure that, the American actors who come up would have different contracts than the people who are here working. But it's got to affect everybody. I think in general, it's a larger moment where, especially with AI, it's probably very good to take this opportunity to put a foot down and say, hang on a second, because if AI does get going, as we see, very clearly with the background performers, that they could just be completely taken out of the equation for the rest of their lives for $200. Mm-hmm. I've heard, AI interviews with, Joe Rogan and Trump talking, and it was incredibly realistic sounding, except for the fact that Trump sounded way more coherent than he does in real life. The AI made complete sentences. But if you weren't told, you wouldn't necessarily know. So I think it's very important for everybody to just have a pause there and say, we need to put limits on this because it will affect all of us.
Mm-hmm. Teri, are there any signs that you're seeing, you have a lot of conversations with people in the industry, that either side is willing to budge or that we're getting any closer to some kind of resolution?
So I think that sentiment has changed a little bit from the beginning, or it certainly has changed for me, Amil. Like at the very beginning, I think a lot of people were optimistic that this would get figured out in or around like the fall, September, October time. Mm-hmm. But there are a few indications that really that's not the case anymore. Firstly, it's quiet. Like it's really quiet. And that's not good because they're just not talking. Yeah. And these issues can't get figured out without talking. Secondly, the streamers really do seem to have the appetite and content to ride this out for a long time. The last conversation I had with a person who was very much in the know is that people are now saying next spring. Oof. So that's really long enough for union members to be desperate. Mm-hmm. I really hope I'm wrong on this. I've never wanted to be more wrong, but that is now the conversations that I'm having with people who are members and who really have an ear to the ground on what's happening and really what's not happening.
This seems like a good point to also point out that here in Canada, ACTRA members have been locked out of commercials by the commercial producers for a year and a half now. And there's no recourse for that. They've just been going ahead and doing non-union commercials. And there's kind of nothing that ACTRA can do about it. It will go on for a long time if they can get away with it. I think, the reason we have unions in the first place is because if, I'm not talking about their qualities individually, but in general, if big business can get away with it, they will. That's why unions are there, because people used to have to, work 7 days a week and, 12-hour days in factories. And I think we all know that actors are so hungry to get out there and do their craft that we would all be probably working for nothing if we had not had a union this whole time. Actors, that's part of a thing. You want to be chosen. You don't want to miss out on your career. And unless we take that collective action, collective labor action is the only way to make things uncomfortable enough for the people on the other side that they are forced to. They just won't without it. I think that the Rock, Dwayne Johnson, just made a very, very large contribution to the Actors Fund. And I've read that, it is a bit of a distraction almost when like super A-listers come down to the picket line, because it's, it skews the discussion, because it's not really about the people making millions and millions of dollars. But if they could help support everybody throughout however long this time is going to be, that would probably be a very, helpful thing to do. Maybe I should take the money we would have spent on Netflix and Disney Plus and just like send that to help somebody buy groceries.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it doesn't get too dire. We'll continue watching the story. I've been watching it from the beginning. Aurora, Teri, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Neil.
Aurora Brown is a Canadian actor who you might remember from Baroness von Sketch, and Teri Hart is an entertainment reporter and a regular here on Commotion. And that's it for the show today. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thank you for listening.